Hi, friends. We just entered the 9 days, the period from the first of the month of Av to Tisha B'Av, the ninth of Av, which is really the headquarters for all mourning and grief in the Jewish calendar. It's the anniversary of the destruction of both of our temples in Jerusalem, the beginning of our exile, the loss of our autonomy, and it's also the anniversary of many other tragic events in Jewish history. And it's a time when, according to Jewish law, we are supposed to decrease our joy and focus our attention on the mourning and the grief, the sad parts and aspects of our history, as well as the longing for the perfection of the world, the return to our homeland physically and spiritually, and ultimately the fixing and the redemption of the entire world. So it's a very meaningful time, but it's also a challenging time. And I struggle with this time, especially because I remember what Rabbi Nachman said. Rabbi Nachman, the great Hasidic master, taught, Mitzvah gedola liot besimcha tamid. It's a great mitzvah, a great commandment, to be joyful always. And he doesn't say always except for the period that we're in now. He doesn't say always except for the 9 days, or always except for Tisha B'Av. He says always. So what are we to make of this? So I learned a beautiful, beautiful Torah from a contemporary rabbi, Rabbi Moshe Wolfson, who wrote a book that covers many aspects of the Torah and the holidays according to Hasidic teachings. And he offers the following. He says that in this period of time, it's not really that we are focusing our attention on the grief and the tragedies of Jewish history. What we're actually doing is joining God's experience of grief, as it were. God is experiencing grief because the Jewish people lost the land. God is experiencing grief because there's human suffering. And in the imagery that Hasidism offers, God is sitting on the floor in mourning, or the Shekhinah, the indwelling presence of God, which is feminine and motherly, is sitting on the floor and crying for all human beings, and especially the Jewish people who have suffered so much throughout our history. And what we're actually doing is sitting together with God on the floor. And when you love someone very much, you join them in their moments of joy and you join them in their moments of grief. And in fact, the ultimate expression and sometimes test of a relationship is one willing to join the other in moments of grief? If we're only interested in the good times, we only go to parties together, but as soon as the other person is having a hard time, we leave. So maybe the relationship isn't as deep as we thought, or as real as we thought. But if we are joining as well in the grief and in the hard times, then that's a sign that the relationship is real, authentic, there's real intimacy, there's real closeness. And so there are Hasidic teachings that say when we enter into this grief, when we join God, as it were, in this grief, we are experiencing grief, yes, but we are also experiencing comfort in the grief itself, because in that grief and our feeling of grief itself is an expression of closeness with God. It's an expression of closeness with the beloved, with the oneness of the universe, with the Creator. It's an alignment with what really is happening during this time, which is that the attention of the cosmos and its creator is on grief. And so when we align ourselves with that grief, the grief is there, but there's also comfort. There's also joy. And it's a different kind of joy than the joy of celebration, of course. Of course it is. It's not the joy of a celebration of a wedding or a birth or a bar or bat mitzvah, or when two people fall in love, or someone discovers a new invention or creates a new work of art. It's not that kind of joy. It's a kind of joy that comes in spite of the grief because of the intimacy and the connection with the one who's grieving, in whose grief we are participating. We are sitting down next to God on the floor, joining in the tears, and in that itself there is some comfort and there is some hidden joy. And in this way, I can understand how we can always be joyful, as Rabbi Nachman teaches. Even in this period, we can be joyful. When we're at a wedding, we can be joyful because of the wedding. When we're in Tisha B'Av, we can be joyful because we are connecting with the beloved, and we are joining with the beloved in the experience of grief. We are experiencing that intimacy, that closeness, that solidarity, that connection, that support. And this, to me, gives a whole new angle on the experience of the 9 days and Tisha B'Av, the period that we're in now. It's not primarily about taking my attention away from joyful things and putting them on sad things. It's about taking my attention from all the scattered places it might go and focusing in on that closeness and solidarity with the one who is grieving. How do I do that? How do I let go of things that hold me back so that I can join the beloved sitting on the ground in grief? Well, I know one thing. The way that I know that I'm doing this well is that I will feel a hidden comfort and joy within the grief, within the tears. So that's the teaching, and it could be that this is the real reason, or related to the real reason, perhaps, that according to mysticism, the Messiah is born on Tisha B'Av. The Messiah is born on the saddest day of the year. The redemption emerges from that place of darkness and grief. It's a classic Jewish idea that in moments of joy we have sadness. At a wedding, we remember the exile. We break a glass at the wedding traditionally. And in moments of grief, we have joy. On Tisha B'Av, the Messiah is born, the seeds of our redemption, the seeds of our greatest joy that we will ever have experienced as a human species, as a universe, are planted on the day of grief, on the day of exile, on the day of mourning. It might also be the case that there are different layers and levels of joy, and that the joy that we experience at a wedding is one level, but an even higher, deeper level of joy is when we can experience joy because of connection and solidarity and closeness and alignment and intimacy, even in moments of sadness. So we shouldn't know from moments of sadness. We should have a lot of weddings and bar and bat mitzvahs to celebrate, and new births and reasons to be happy. And I bless you with all of that. And when life gives us moments that are more challenging, and especially when someone around us is experiencing a challenge, if we're able to show up fully, if we are able to bring ourselves to that person and participate in their experience of grief or of challenge, there is comfort in that for the other and also for us. And this to me is the deeper meaning of Tisha B'Av and the purpose of Tisha B'Av in a certain way. You'll find in many teachings from Hasidism that Tisha B'Av, the day of grief, is also secretly the day of joy and connection. There's tremendous opportunity in this day. So with that, I invite you to imagine, as it were, with all the theological questions we might ask about this image, imagine God is sitting on the floor weeping, all alone. And you see this. How will you respond? Will you go over and sit down next to God on the floor and hold God's hand and participate in that weeping and experience that connection and the hidden joy of the day of Tisha B'Av? I invite you to bring this image into your experience of the day. If you go to synagogue, if you're listening to the reading of Lamentations, if you're participating online, or if you're just thinking about the day in your own space, this is another way of connecting to the day. So I bless you with joy always, different qualities of joy in different times, but to know that mitzvah gedola liot b'simcha tamid, it's always a commandment to be in joy, or at least to be in quest of joy in every moment.